Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our public meeting. And if you could go back, please. Just want to do a high-level introduction of why we're here. This is our local hazard mitigation plan update public meeting. Today is February 26, 2026. I appreciate folks who are joining us live, and this meeting will be recorded and posted to our website for those folks who aren't able to join live during this presentation and update to the campus community or really the district community. Um, Next slide, please, Andy. Thank you. My name is David Kichatrian, and I am the co-facilitator of this effort along with my colleague at Saddleback, Rod Garcia. And we just wanted to welcome on behalf of both campuses and district services as well. We hope this information will be helpful and useful for your education. And if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you will have an opportunity to address those at the end of the presentation, where we will share the email address for folks to provide feedback. With that, we have a presentation and we have a lead presenter today, who's Andy Petro, who's a well-known statewide resource and authority in this arena, in the area of emergency preparedness and local hazard mitigation plan. He will go into the more specifics of where we are and where we're going with the update of our plan. Andy, take it away.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon. So again, my name is Andy Petro. I'm working with the district on helping them update their local hazard mitigation plan. The last plan was done in 2022 and it has to be updated every 5 years. So we're in the process of going through that update, which we'll kind of explain. So kind of the help with the presentation today, this is our public meeting. So there's different groups that we work with. The public meaning people outside of the working groups that we want to try to get perspective from, in this case would be the students, faculty, and even surrounding citizens and things along that line. To try to get their input into the process as well. We usually get the input at different times, which we'll explain during the presentation. And today is the initial meeting that we're having with the public. So again, we put together a quick agenda to kind of walk through the purpose of the meeting, a little bit of the background of what mitigation is. We'll talk about mitigation plans. We'll talk a brief introduction on what's inside the district's local hazard mitigation plan. And again, we'll talk about the purpose of the outreach effort into the next step. So that's today's agenda. We have slides that kind of reflect that. So I'll take a quick pause to see if, David, if anyone would like to add anything before we start, or if there's any initial questions we could answer prior to jumping in and just presenting information.
I think we can go ahead, and folks, if you have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand or put it in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, great. So the purpose of the meeting or presentation, guys, we want to introduce the project, right? So what are we doing and why are we doing it? So these are kind of the things that we're hoping that we answer today. Want to gain an understanding of mitigation. It's a term that's used more frequently than it was in the past. It's still kind of misunderstood, kind of even today. But we want to kind of make sure that there's a clear understanding of what we mean by mitigation. We want to have a clear understanding of what we mean by local hazard mitigation plans. We want to increase awareness of what's inside the district's plan. We want to talk about how we're going to go about developing or updating the plan, and then what hazards are being addressed within the plan. That's where we are initially at this point. And we want to set expectations moving forward. How can we, keep the update process and keep you guys informed of where we are and going through that whole process. Again, the background. So FEMA provides grants after disasters to mitigate future impacts to threats and hazards. Historically, they've only dealt with natural hazards. Recently, they have expanded and we have looked at multi-hazards. That includes some threats. So we are expanding it because we want more of a comprehensive plan that a lot of our plans now look at both threats and hazards. Historically, it's been very difficult to get plans or projects approved by FEMA. So in the past, we had $1 billion to spend. No one had any mitigation plans. They didn't have projects identified. And then we were scrambling to put projects together. The purpose of these local hazard mitigation plans were to have communities actually go through their risk assessment, understand where their gaps are, identify potential projects so that when funding became available, we could just infuse money into the communities faster, get money on the ground, spent, get more resiliency in our communities. That's the purpose of what we're doing. So in 2000, FEMA required, they made an adjustment to the Stafford Act. If you're familiar with the law, the Stafford Act, that basically regulates FEMA, authorizes the use of FEMA, also the programs, requires that local hazard mitigation plans must be in place. The project that you are identifying or asking for FEMA funding must be within their plans moving forward. So, in moving past 2000, if you asked for a project in mitigation and it was not in your mitigation plan or you did not have a mitigation plan, you were automatically removed from the funding process, right? So, you needed to have these things in place prior to seeking the funding. So mitigation, what is mitigation? The way we define it on the emergency management standpoint, the way FEMA defines it, is anything we do to reduce and or eliminate the loss of life. So when we do our risk assessment, we'll start understanding what those impacts could be. And what we try to do is say, what could we do to lessen that, right? We also look at ways that we can increase our capabilities when we identify projects to help address some of those impacts or reduce. So instead of having two buildings collapse or be damaged, how can we make that one or none moving forward? Those are the types of things that we'll do within mitigation itself. Mitigation is one of the five mission areas in the National Preparedness System. Over to the right is the five different mission areas. It's response. If you think about that, stabilizing. Recovery is about restoring. Mitigation is about reducing and or eliminating. Prevention and protection is what we do against terrorism. That's kind of where those two terms came in, where those mission areas are focused on a lot of the prevention and protection against terrorist acts kind of moving forward. So those are the five mission areas. The benefits of mitigation, it's one of the mission areas that are looking to break the cycle of, an event, damage, response, recovery, damage, response, kind of going over. It's a way of us kind of eliminating that whole event happens. We have less of a response or need for a response. Our recovery time is shortened because we've done more things to make ourselves resilient as we move through the process. So that's the purpose, the benefit. So some of the other things, it reduces damage to property, of course, saves lives. It helps us reduce the economic impact, right? So we don't have those large downtimes where our small businesses are gone or even our own operations are out as long as they should be or could be. It's kind of shortened. We can bounce back. We keep that whole quality of life, right? We minimize social disruption, distractions within the community, loss of services, things along the time, and we shorten our recovery time. So that's the benefits of mitigation as we move through. So again, I mentioned local hazard mitigation plans, right? We have mitigation. What do we have inside of a plan? So our goal, and this is a requirement of FEMA, when I mentioned that we had to have a plan in place if we wanted to pursue grants underneath the FEMA funding. They want to develop a strategy to reduce and eliminate impacts from threats and hazards. So it's a 5-year strategy where we say that this is where we think we are. These are some of the projects and understanding of our gaps and things that we can do to help eliminate those gaps, reduce those gaps, or reduce the impacts, increase our capabilities. So they're looking for a 5-year goal. That's kind of what these plans are. The real value out of here are the projects, right? The assessment that we do is the information that we gain in order to better identify what we can do about that, right? What we need to do to make ourselves more resilient moving forward. Things that we look for is to apply a comprehensive planning approach. And what we mean by that, we want to involve what they call the whole community. So that is not only looking at district representation, looking at surrounding jurisdictions, looking at surrounding companies, but also reaching out to the public, which is the point of today's meeting, right? We want to try to get the perspective of the whole community. So it's not just government, it's not only just the district itself, it's utility companies and other members, and also the public, students, faculty, and kind of understanding where things are that from their perspective, where they think we need to address things looking forward. So we do screen and address multiple hazards. So we don't only look at the top three. It's supposed to be a comprehensive plan. So we look at multiple hazards. It's not just fire, earthquakes, and floods. We kind of expand off of that. We make sure that we kind of reach beyond those big three to make sure we're looking at those things. And the value of having multiple hazards is that we don't solve one problem while creating another. So that's basically saying that we solve for an earthquake but create a flood, or we create something for flood, we raise something up, and then now we've run into high wind issues and it creates a problem someplace else. So we look at multiple hazards to make sure that what we're doing kind of fits all hazards, and we make sure that we're increasing our resiliency and not introducing new vulnerability to a new type of hazard as we move through our process. And the last bullet is, of course, engaging the public, which is, again, the point of today's meeting. Uh, Things that we also do in mitigation plans is we want to understand our current capabilities. So that's basically tools in our toolbox. We look at things like plans, governance, laws, policies, things that kind of drive our resiliency. We also look at resources, what type of staffing we have, what type of equipment do we have, what kind of resources or assets do we have, what kind of funding do we have kind of moving forward, what's our ability to kind of really alter, move, reallocate so we can address things. We look at vulnerabilities to hazards. So we look at not only exposure, where it is and what's exposed, but we look at the vulnerabilities to those hazards. So an example is if we have a wood structure in the forest, it's exposed to a wildfire. It's probably vulnerable to that wildfire. But if we had a brick building in the forest, it would be exposed to the wildfire, but it may not be as vulnerable. So those are the types of things that we look at, consider as we're moving through our planning process to really understand what the impacts are and what we can do about that, right, moving forward. Out of that, then we also identify projects or actions, measures. They go by different names. It's irrelevant what we call them. It's really things that we can do to help build resiliency within our district, right? Things that we could do to kind of either one, reduce the impact, shorten our response time, shorten our recovery time, or avoid the hazard altogether moving forward, right? Another thing we like to do with our plans is especially with FEMA, they like to know that we've integrated what we found in this plan into other planning processes. So what we try to do is make sure that the information that we gain here is not just kept in a vacuum over off to the side in the plan, that we make sure we put this into our other planning. So we try to integrate these kind of concepts into master plans, if you're a city, into your general plans, capital improvement projects. We look at critical infrastructure protection plans. We try to make sure that we're playing off the same sheet of music, the same information, using the same analysis as we move forward, right? So a lot of the work we do in mitigation plans lays across multiple different types of plans. We want to make sure that that information gets integrated, put together, and things, policies, goals, projects, anything that we propose in our mitigation plan, we want to make sure it's compatible with other plans. So if we have climate action plans, if we have greenhouse gas plans, or anything else that we're talking about, things that we're trying to reduce or certain type of plans, we want to make sure that our actions are compatible and not contradicting what are out there in other plans moving forward. So there's a big integration with other planning efforts as we move through. Those are the types of things that we do when we go through a local hazard mitigation planning process. Some other things about the local hazard mitigation plan itself. So these are the requirements, right? So local, whether that's a city, a county, a special district, could be a number of private nonprofits. They kind of put these plans together. That's what we call locals. They prepare the plans, they adopt the plan, and they maintain the plan. They must be updated every 5 years. So what you want to make sure is your plan doesn't go out of compliance. If it does, you will not be eligible to get obligated funds underneath FEMA's mitigation programs. It doesn't stop you from going after other type of funding, but if you were looking for FEMA funding, which is probably the most abundant of most of the mitigation funds out there, you would need to have this plan updated, adopted, and in compliance with a 5 year cycle. Cal OES has a role in this. The state will, the Office of Emergency Services, reviews the plans for compatible compliance, a few other things that they look through, but FEMA ultimately approves the plan. So when OES is done with their review, they send it over to the federal side, FEMA, who then basically concurs with OES's findings or finds additional comments that they'd like addressed, and then they send us approved plans. The approval comes back with approval pending adoption. The plans are not formally approved without adoption by the local government, right? A local jurisdiction. So if FEMA approves your plan, they usually gets approval pending adoption. If you never adopt, the plan is never approved technically, which means you're not eligible for funding. So it must be adopted by the local jurisdiction. Usually that requires some type of board action or council action that just recognizes the plan and kind of formally adopts it into their category of projects and plans. And that's how that gets go back to FEMA. We finally get the final approval and the 5-year window starts. What they're looking for when we're going through this, because these are a little bit of a plan, but also a little bit of a regulatory kind of documentation as well. They look at proper documentation of the planning process. So they like to know what was your process, how many meetings, who attended, how often did you discuss things, did you reach out to the public? So they look for that proper documentation of the planning process. They want to make sure these plans are not created in a vacuum in a closet with just a consultant or just the local representation with two people writing the plans. They want to make sure that you kind of got the full perspective of what's happening within the district itself. They look for current community profile, in this case, the district profile type of information that's relevant or important to understand, such as geography. We look at energy sources. We'll look at geography, we look at transportation, we'll look at kind of certain information that demographics, certain information that we want to kind of rely on or kind of understand as we're moving through identifying projects. Again, we want as much information. This is an information-driven process. We want as much relevant information to consider as we move through our process, considering all of the hazards. And when we come up with our recommendations, we want to kind of understand where some of our challenges may be. Do we have an aging population? Do we have a young population? Do we have language barriers, people with transportation issues? If we decided that we wanted to evacuate, how would that look? What would that be? Do we have enough freeway access? Do we have enough public transportation available to us that we could evacuate other things if we needed? So those are some of the things that we look at in our community profile. Hazards, threats, we look at an array of different hazards. We don't look at the top three, as I mentioned, and we profile those. We look at impact information. That's our vulnerability, right? What does it mean? Is it bigger than a bread box? They also look and make sure that we've identified projects and actions in there. They like to see a project and action for just about every hazard specifically, but there are times that we could use multiple hazards. So if we use early warning systems or communication systems, sometimes that might cut across multiple hazards at a time. It's not only for an earthquake, but it could also be used for a flood, a wind event, terrorist attack, power outages, or anything else. So there's times that we could have one project that cuts across multiple hazards. So, but they are looking to make sure that we address every single hazard that we have in our plan. They also look to make sure that we have a method for reviewing and updating our plan, such as we're doing now. They want to know who's in charge, what does that sequence look like, how will that all work? And they want to look at how we're going to implement our plan over the 5-year period so that it just doesn't sit on a shelf, right? So we're not looking to create plans that collect dust. It's about really having a living document that we could work with and kind of move through. And then they look for verification of adoption. So those are the types of things that are included in your mitigation plan as you move forward. So that is kind of a very high level of what mitigation plans are, kind of mitigation itself and how that all fits together. What we're going to dive into now, unless there's some questions, and I don't see anyone's hand raised or I don't see any questions in the chat. Okay. So now we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the current or a little bit of the update of the district's local hazard mitigation plan. So this is what the district's plan includes. So I mentioned we looked at natural threats and hazards. We're looking at man-made or man-caused or human-caused, depending on what term you want to use, threats and hazards. We're also looking at technology threats and hazards. So we're looking at things when traditionally we always thought that loss of technology would be a secondary or a cascading impact from hazards, but we're finding more and more that those are sometimes the threat or the hazard themselves, such as power outage when it's a PSPS event or a brownout or a blackout, things along that line. Technology equipment failure, different types of events that happen where loss of power, where we traditionally, as I mentioned, we thought that those weren't really seen after an earthquake, after a flood, after a fire, but now we're seeing them happen on their own. So we're now planning for them separately and saying, what can we do to better prepare ourselves, insulate ourselves, make ourselves more resilient to these types of threats and hazards? So we analyze those. That's why we include them into the district's plan, because we want to consider them as we're looking at our building our resiliency moving forward. We're analyzing all three campuses. So if you're familiar with the acronyms, we're looking at ATEP over in Tustin. We're looking at IVC over in Irvine, of course, and Saddleback over in Mission Viejo. So we're looking at all three campuses. We are looking at things within that district boundary, but we're not planning for things within the district boundary. We're planning for things within the campus boundaries, kind of moving forward. We are updating this plan. As I mentioned, it's required every 5 years. Last updated in 2022. So 2027 is when this plan will expire technically, and we need to be approved and adopted with additional projects in there prior to 2027. So we are in compliance as we move forward, trying to get additional mitigation funds from the federal government. We have created two planning teams, internal planning teams, and I'll go into that on the next slide in a second, and also the public. That's what this meeting is about. So we have our planning processes over to the right. We've created a four-phased process where we'll go through like preparing for the plan, developing of the plan, and we break that into existing conditions, which would be the community profile, the hazard profile, our capabilities. We look at everything that we're kind of considering our assets, understanding what we have in our tools in our toolbox. Then we look at the risk, which are really dealing with what are the impacts to the threats and hazards. And then we look at the mitigation strategies. What can we do about it? And then we finalize the plan, right? We're putting everything together. That's when we go through our review. We'll go through our review with our two planning teams. We'll go through the review with the public, and then we will go over to the state and federal government for final review and adoption of our plans moving forward. So that's kind of what's inside, very high level within the plan from initial. I mentioned that we have two types of planning teams. We have a core planning team, which is, for lack of a better term, could be also called a steering committee. That's representation from the district and the college campuses. It's a smaller group. It's kind of made up of like six people who are really kind of help guiding the direction that we want to move, kind of understanding what some of the impacts are. We're looking at initial drafts of sections. Once those drafts are prepared, then we bring it to our larger stakeholder group. So our larger stakeholder group is made up of our core planning team plus, right? So we have representation from the district and colleges, but we have additional departments with the districts and colleges. So at the top, where we may only have select people, maybe police, the administrative services on our core team. When we go down below, we'll open that up. We open up more to maintenance and some other different departments on the campuses to make sure we have a good perspective from the district and the campuses. We also open it up to representation within the regional stakeholders. So we look at bringing in the state of California, some of the state departments. We have state parks in the area. We have Caltrans. We have other departments that kind of work with on a regular basis, parks, things like that we'll bring in. We also look at the county of Orange. We want to kind of understand what they're doing. They also produce a local hazard mitigation plan at the county, or what we call operational area level. So we want to make sure things that we're doing at the district level or within the district is compatible with what's being done in the county. We also look at what's happening within the cities surrounding us. I mentioned that, where our campuses are. So we bring in Irvine, Mission Viejo, and Tustin to make sure what the city is doing, that it's compatible to what we're doing or we like to do, and understanding what projects and actions they're taking and whether that'll benefit the district, whether we can kind of leverage, piggyback, whatever term you want to use, onto their actions, or whether our actions are even needed anymore if the cities are actually taking certain actions. Maybe they are reducing the risk, and that there's a smaller impact to the campuses now, and something that we could look at a different type of project. It may be diminished or a completely different scope of work, but we want to understand what those cities are doing around us to make sure that our projects are compatible, whether they understand what we're doing and they could also support our efforts on the campuses and make it easier for us kind of moving through. We look at lifelines, utilities, so we bring in the different electrical companies. So we have both Edison and San Diego Gas and Electric. We look at our water distribution. So that's everything from well, we have molten water down there. I think we have metropolitan water districts. We have a few different water districts: gas, SoCal Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric. SoCal Gas, and we have San Diego Gas and Electric. Telecommunications, we also bring in a lot of the phone companies, start understanding what they're doing with the TCOM, right? What they're doing as far as cell towers, the backup power on those cell towers. What does that look like? What's the redundancy? What are the pockets? How will things look after a disaster? Will we be able to tap into that? Does it make sense? So we usually bring these stakeholders in to understand what actions they're taking, what some of the gaps they have in their own systems, and how that could hinder or support some of the work that we're doing at the district itself. So we bring in those larger stakeholder group so that we then get their perspective into our planning process as well. Again, as I mentioned, the purpose of this is to make sure that we're taking in as much and the best information and making solid information driven decisions, right? So we're getting our core team that's driving it, we're getting our stakeholders providing us input, as well as I mentioned this meeting going to the public and trying to get that perspective put into our plan as well. This is what the table of contents for the district's plan looks like. So we have an initial summary or preface kind of section, introduction. If you look over to the right, it tells you why are we doing this, right? So it's kind of what's the purpose, right? Why is this important? Why are we doing the mitigation plans? What's the requirement? What's the regulation? What's the code? Who's responsible? Things along that line. So why are we doing this? Then we talk about chapter 2 or section 2, depending on how you want to look at that. We talk about how will we get it done, right? We talked about the 2 planning teams. We talked about reaching out to the public. We'll talk about who's on our team, what's the representation. We talk about the cadence of our meetings. We talk about some of the discussions. We talk about when we reach out to the public, how that information is fed back into our process, right? The information, the feedback that we are provided, how that gets integrated into our planning process and how we incorporate that where necessary. Chapter 3 and 4, which is the district profile and capability assessment. The capability assessment is our tools in our toolbox, as I mentioned. That could be everything from our current staffing, how we can augment our current staffing, it get into policies or governance, what laws, what plans are in place, what policies are in place, different things that are out there, things that govern us or drive us or hinder us or allow us to do things. Do we have a resource reduction kind of thing? Do we have defensible space policies, things along that line? So we want to understand how well those tools are working for us. Are they actually helping us move through this process or not? We look at the type of money we have in our capability assessment and the district profile. So again, those are our considerations, right? Our existing conditions. We're looking at this is the grounding where we are, what we're moving for. And then we get into our problem statement, right? Our 5 and 6 are basically looking at our problem statement. We look at the hazard assessment. We look at the threats. We look at basically profile them, and we'll get into a little bit of that later, but it's basically a description. Where's the location? What's the history? What is, climate considerations? Do we see it changing? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better more frequently? Is it turning up in different areas that we didn't have traditionally? Right, as it shifted west, as it shifted east or north or south, and we're seeing higher rates of rain, less rain, more drought, extreme weather, so things along that line. So we're trying to understand what the problem is, right? So what we do then is we say, okay, great, we understand our problem. Now we're saying, okay, so what does that mean? When we say an earthquake is our risk, what does that mean? That's where chapter 6 will come in, where we'll start kind of putting more qualitative and quantitative assessment behind those hazards. So when we talk about earthquakes being a problem, what does that mean? How many buildings are we expecting? How long do we expect to be without power? How many people will be impacted? Do we expect injuries, fatalities? Are we prepared for those types of things? So we start looking at, is it bigger than a bread box? What does that mean? What kind of dollar amount are we talking about? Debris removal, economic impacts, things like that. We start looking at in our vulnerability assessment to start kind of qualifying and quantifying what each one of these hazards look like, so that when we're saying, what can we do about it? Chapter 7, our solution, we understand what our problem statement is, right? So we're all kind of working in the same direction. We understand our considerations. We have language barriers or transportation issues, and we're coming up with solutions. We don't want to say everyone's self-evacuate when we have transportation issues, right? That doesn't solve our problem. We have to figure out how we then work around our considerations, addressing our problem, but coming up with our solution. And chapter 8 is just the administration, how we will move this plan forward in the next 5 years. Again, the problem statement plus considerations equals our solution. So it's kind of like, what is our problem statement? What tools do we have in our toolbox? Do we have things that address that? Are they good tools? Do we need to change our tool, get a different tool, different approach? That is our solution moving forward. That's how we look at things. So, um, current status, we have drafts of the preface chapter 1, 2, and 3 that is under the stakeholder planning team review. So our core team has reviewed those sections. We've provided input and we have a draft section. We've met with our stakeholder team. We've presented those sections to them and it's under review with them right now. We're expecting some comments back. We can make those available to the public after, or we could wait till the very end and put it all together into one giant plan and have review. But those sections will be available shortly. And chapters 4 and 5 are 75% drafted right now. So we are still working with the core planning team. The core planning team hasn't finished its review of those draft sections. Once those plans or those sections are done, we will then move them over to our stakeholder planning team, get that larger perspective, larger view of our planning process of the information within those chapters, and then we'll go back out to the public with those sections. So is this pace good? Everyone kind of following along? No questions? Okay, I'm going to keep going then. So, again, jump in, raise your hand, just ask a question away. You're not going to throw my timing off, but I just want to make sure that this is making some sense. Hopefully, it is. So, within the district's plan, these are the threats and hazards that we're looking at. There's 17 of them. So, these are all of the ones that are in the plan currently. If you notice, we don't have COVID or pandemic in our plans. That's infectious disease. That's the top on the right. Pandemic is really basically the level of the infectious disease, whether it's global, whether it's a regional pandemic, whether it's an epidemic, or whether it's an outbreak. Those are just levels. And then COVID is a type of infectious disease. It's not an infectious disease itself. So we look at it a broader range when we say infectious disease. We're not only looking at COVID or the pandemic. We are factoring that into our discussion there, but it's just not focused solely on that. It's kind of expanded beyond that. So again, these are the different hazards, and I think maybe it's easier to talk through them on the next few slides. So what we do with the threats and hazards as a requirement under the federal guidance, we must screen our hazards. This doesn't mean anything more than that our planning teams or our teams kind of break down the hazards into a more meaningful kind of category, basically saying which ones keep us up at night, right? There's different ways we can screen a hazard to prioritize them, or whatever way you want to call it. What we've selected is we're using more of a heat chart, and we have probability going across the top, impact along the side. We have 3 categories in each. So we have, if you can picture it, we have a SWOT analysis or a heat chart, whatever you want to talk about it. We have 9 boxes. We have a high, medium, and low. We have significant, limited, and negligible on the one side. And what we'll do is we go hazard by hazard and we look at, does it have a high probability? And FEMA is now asking us to quantify this or qualify it, depending on how you want to look at it. So we've come up with language that says greater of 75% chance of that event happening in that type of hazard or threat over the next 5 years. So will we see rain over the next 5 years, right? Or a flood or extreme temperatures, right? We look at medium risk being we have a 30 to 75% chance of it happening. And then low means less than 30% chance of it happening over the next 5 years. That's our probability. Now we're saying, great. Well, if it happens, what's the significance, right? So we're looking at if we say we have a high probability of something happening, rain, we want to understand, is it of significant, is it catastrophic? Is it critical? Do we expect to be down for weeks? Do we expect building collapse, fatalities, injuries? or are we expecting a little bit more of a limited, it's impacted, but it's not significant. We may see down trees, we may see some disruptions to our operations, but it's not like we're out of business, or is it negligible, right? Nothing really happened. Yeah, we had water on the campus. It got, flooded for a little bit, but our drainage was good, so we didn't really have a problem. So it was negligible. So we kind of put those two scores together and we come up with our heat chart. So this is the basically the assessment on all 17 hazards. So aircraft, you see by the campus on the left, you see probability and impact. So we're saying that we think that aircraft's a low probability of something happening on the campuses. But we're saying if it does happen, that we have a high significance in ATEP. And the reason ATEP is higher than the rest is just because of the location at John Wayne Airport, right? It's in that flight pattern that we're saying that if something happens, its chances are it's a larger commercial airlines, it's something more significant could happen, where the other ones would probably be small aircraft, something, we're seeing it all the time now. I wouldn't, maybe not all the time, but we're seeing it more than before, where we're seeing small craft planes kind of coming down in communities, freeways, golf courses, and different things. So we're trying to say what that impact could look like. We look at I think we go up to down. I forget what civil disturbance, right? So that's really more you're looking at a protest, right? Something along that line, kind of activism, things along that going on. We're seeing more and more of it. So we're saying a probability and impact could be minimal, could be broken windows. Sometimes they do get out of hand. Sometimes they're meant to be peaceful, and then you get conflicting parties together. It creates a little bit more of a disturbance. So we're saying that's the potential there. Dam failure. There is a dam very close to Orange County, which that if that dam was to break, I think it's Prado Dam, could create some problems for us. We're saying that yes, low probability of it happening because we have dam safety regulations, we have other kind of inspections and things, that even if it was to break for an earthquake or anything else, that the impacts could be low because of the volume of water behind it, the situational location, the distance from the dam, or it could just be the height of the buildings themselves where the campus is located. We're saying it's probably a low kind of scoring. Drought, we seem to be in and out of drought almost annually, almost weekly in some cases. It seems like we're in it one minute, out the next. Right now, I don't think anyone would say we're in a drought, but give it a minute and it could change. So, but we're saying right now we think it's low on both probability and impact. Right now, we think we're pretty good for the next 5 years. After that, we may reassess that, and that could change because it's, drought's a little bit more of a cycle where it seems to kind of ebb and flow. Earthquake, we're saying, is a high probability of an earthquake happening. And if a significant earthquake was to happen, we could see high impacts on all the campuses. So you got the Newport Inglewood fault, you got the San Andreas fault. We're probably more impacted by the Newport Inglewood fault than we are San Andreas, but still both have some impacts to us. We'll look at the numbers and kind of understand what that assessment. And many times, even with an earthquake, if we're not directly impacted, we could be indirectly impacted, meaning that a lot of the communities outside of Orange County are impacted, and that they use the campus as sometimes a staging area or a temporary housing, and they do other things. So we could have a high impact from operational standpoint as well, because earthquakes are usually more regional than local in some of those distances. Energy disruption, again, we looked at the probability and impact, things that we can do, challenge that we do. So these are, again, the brownouts, the PSPS events, if you're familiar with those, the public safety power shutoff events, where there's high wind red flag events where they turn power off and they try to zone it, but the systems are not really designed for that necessarily. So they have large areas of turning off power. We also have brownouts, blackouts, the flex alerts, things along that line that kind of look at us. We have other reasons why sometimes our energy goes out, right? Just fuses and things along that line. So things that we're looking at and the energy. Our next series of hazards, extreme temperatures. This is extreme cold and extreme heat. So we come up with our definitions so we're all on the same page. It doesn't mean one day it's 100 degrees. We have definitions in there say it has to be a week prolonged period of extreme heat, not just 1 or 2 days, right? It's more of a week long 10-day event with high humidity, high this, that we've kind of put some parameters on that or some, quantifiers on that to kind of understand that. So we talked about the three campuses and we came up with the scores right now of probability and impact on extreme temperature. Flooding, as I mentioned earlier, this is what's going on. You see Saddleback has a little bit of a higher probability, and that's because of the canyon behind it where some of the water will go. So it just has a little bit of a higher probability of it kind of being potentially impacted, kind of moving through, but the impact is low, right? Higher probability of seeing the occurrence, but a low impact still. We have hazardous materials accidents. So that's everything from on campus to around the campus. There is not much in some of the cities that we work with. We look at rail, kind of cargo going through the city where they have chlorine. We looked at that. There wasn't as many. The rails was not as close to some of the campuses where we think it would be in the plume or the area. So we're looking at a lower probability, lower impact. We do have a higher impact over in Irvine just because of some of the proximities of the freeways and a lot of the things that are kind of transported across our freeways. Infectious disease, we talked about that. That is still, for all intents and purposes right now, that it is COVID that we're dealing with, but there are other infectious diseases that we look at. Everything from even when it's things happening within the animal industry, kind of we're looking at livestock, we're looking at different things with the infectious disease. We're looking at different types of viruses and different bacteria, things that are out there. So we're kind of considering that. COVID is still out there. We're still looking at that. So it's still a consideration. That's why it's medium and high. If it's to ever kick up again, if we're ever to see problems that we think we could be, we're not out of the woods, so to speak, on some of that. So we're keeping that up on kind of more of a significant of the hazards that we're looking at. Landslide, we're looking at that, meaning natural landslides, not secondary landslides after an earthquake. So it's not the cascading event that an earthquake happens in the landslide. We're really looking at things that happen after the event. This could be also things like mud and debris flow. So we could have a fire in the hills. The fire doesn't create the landslide, but the consequent rain does create sometimes mud flows and debris flows and things along that line. So we look at that and see what that could look like on our campuses. We also look at natural gas pipeline accidents. The real reason for this was a lot of the exposure to the natural gas pipelines that were down in Saddleback, just the way the gas is disseminated on the campus, the way it enters the campus. There was a little bit of risk with it being older infrastructure, the location and how it was being used, feeding the power plant on the campus itself. That we were just looking at that and wanted to kind of call that threat out there as a potential problem, whether that could be loss of the pipeline itself, an accident itself, or anything else along that line. Our last five, we're looking at radiological accident. That's really dealing with San Clemente. If you're familiar with Songs down there, it's the nuclear generating power plant down there. It is defunct, but it still does have radioactive material down there. There have been in the news lately about, how long the walls will hold up before they need to move things. And I've even heard discussions about possibly starting it back up, but I know that, highly unlikely, but there has been discussions just with the brownouts, blackouts, and things along that line. But so we have that on our radar, kind of understanding what those concentric circles could look like, what the wind pattern could be, if something was to happen, what the spill could be, what it could be to the coastal environments and things along that line. Technology disruption is looking at anything from equipment failure to a little bit of hacks or anything where we lose technology, whether that's communication, whether that's email, whether that's telephone, websites, anything along that line. We're looking at kind of what that energy disruption or technology disruption could look like kind of moving forward. We're looking at terrorism. Even though we're not a primary target, a lot of things in Orange County could become targets just because of its high visibility and high population areas. There are things around could spill over. There could be things that if perceived that the businesses around or anyone else is kind of adding to certain things, you do see kind of green terrorism, whatever you want to call it, kind of creeping into our communities in some cases. So we're looking at that. It's not only international terrorism, it could be local terrorism, kind of looking at things. Wildfire, which, we're dealing with. You guys saw the storm last year. When you get the wind driven events, which create significant damage, what that could look like. coming off the hills, kind of moving in our direction. We talk about again, Saddleback being the higher just because of the canyon behind it. You get wind-blown events. Things could come rapidly onto the campuses pretty quick, and that could get very high very quick on the impact standard, moving that way. Windstorm, we're seeing more and more wind now than we have traditionally. We used to just talk about Santa Anas. Now we're talking about larger gusts. We're talking things even hurricane-ish type of wind, large gale force winds coming through, 60-mile-an-hour winds. The LA wildfires, guys, that was really 100-mile-an-hour winds that were driving the ambers across the region, right? So the fire was an issue. It could have been contained earlier, but when fire department was trying to make windbreaks and the ambers were going over their heads and going another mile ahead of them, it was hard to build that fire perimeter, right? So those are the things we're seeing with the windstorms. We're seeing wind damage now. I live up in Porter Ranch, and I could tell you that this is a wind tunnel. Every time I turn around, it seems like it's gusting, beyond control up here, but that's kind of what we're dealing with. So those are the 17 hazards. We've gone through and profiled all 17, so we have an understanding of what the significance are. And we've also done screening on all 17. This is the screening for all 17. So I'll see, again, this is what's available or to our stakeholder group right now. We will make it out to the public, but we are presenting it to the public to see if any of these hazards or the scores or the screening kind of raise alarm, alerts, concerns, or any questions about any of the findings that we have initially so far. Okay. Hearing none, seeing none, I'll kind of move on. So again, I mentioned early on that we want a comprehensive planning process. One of the things that we talk about, we have our two planning teams, the core team, and we have our stakeholder, which is a larger regional team, which pulls in everything from the state, some federal, very little, but counties, cities, other stakeholders in the area. And then we had the public, I mentioned, right? The purpose of this meeting, kind of how we can reach out to the public, gain further insight, things that are happening to families, students, faculty, how we can address things moving forward. So this is our public outreach plan. This is documented within the local hazard mitigation plan. This is something that FEMA OES will look at, our intent as well as our implementation of this. So our outreach will be virtual. We find historically when we do it virtual, we get more attendance than we did in person. We used to hold these mandatory in person, and we had very few people attend. So we find virtual, we get a little bit more participation. It gets the same message across, and it seems to be a better platform for most. Something positive that actually came out of COVID. So we're finding that kind of working here. So we're going to continue that with our public outreach so people don't have to make arrangements with childcare or compete with other priorities. We're just trying to see if you can carve out some time out of your day to kind of look at these presentations. We are also recording all of these meetings so you can go back and listen to these meetings you can look at them a second time, or if you're unable to attend the initial meeting, you can go back and still listen to the material as we're going through. We're going to hold two public meetings. There's possible third, but at a minimum, we're definitely holding two. Number one is today's meeting, the project kickoff and initial efforts. So this is our project kickoff. We had some initial efforts that we've done with our core team and our stakeholder group. That's what we're presenting today, looking for a little bit of public comment and input. And then we're going to do one at the back end when the draft plan is all put together. So I mentioned that we're working with chapters 4 and 5 right now. When we get 6, 7, and 8 done, we're going to put it all together. The core team, the stakeholder group will look at it, approve it. We will then bring it back out for public review. We'll give a window of probably 3 weeks for public review and comment on those extra chapters or the whole document put together. And then we'll get that feedback and go back to our core team, go back to our planning team, let them know what kind of comments we receive from the public, and kind of determine what's the best course of action and whether we should or incorporate it or whether it's already within the plan moving forward. And then we'll incorporate that into our draft plan that we will forward back over to Cal OES for review and hopefully for their approval to send over to FEMA for the final formal approval moving through that process. We will provide status updates via the district and the college social media. So we have website, Facebook page. I believe we're setting up a link to where you could kind of log in and receive regular updates if you'd like. We have a method for there so that you can also provide comments on the website. So there's an email. We'll provide the email after this meeting as well, but it's on the website where as you're looking at sections or if you have a question that comes up after the fact, you can send that into the core team. The core team will look at it, decide whether it needs to go to the larger stakeholder group or whether we'll address that, and we'll get back to you with the comments moving forward. There'll also be somewhat board meetings and other community meetings. So as board meetings, we may actually keep our boards up to date, understanding where we are in our process. There are some questions sometimes about what we're doing, about the progress towards any plan or a hazard in particular, that we kind of use this information to help feed that information gap. And we also have community meetings. So as we attend other meetings, we're trying to get on as many agendas as possible within the district to make sure that mitigation is being considered and that people understand or other members in the community understand that we're taking this action on the district itself. So our next steps. So kind of just wrapping it up here. So we're going to hold additional core and stakeholder planning team meetings. So that's going to be on an ongoing basis. We meet with our core planning team more than we meet with our stakeholder group. So the core team's doing a lot of the legwork, a lot of the grinding behind the scenes. When we think it's at a certain point, we bring it to our stakeholder group, which I think we're meeting quarterly, and we're bringing the information to them, gaining their information, putting that back into our plans, and then bring it back to them for final review and get their approval as we move forward. We're going to be preparing the next few sections. I mentioned where we are, the capabilities assessment. We're moving into our risk assessment. So the capability assessment is our chapter 4. Again, that's our tools in our toolbox, right? What our staffing looks like, what our money, technology, assets, what tools do we have in our toolbox, particularly with mitigation. We're going to do our risk assessment, which is our impact, right? We're going to look at what does this mean? What does an earthquake mean to us? How many, how much damage we're going to have, how long we'll be out power, things along that line. And then we're going to start leaning into our mitigation strategies. What can we do about it, right? How can we reduce based on our capabilities, looking at the risk, what the loss could be or what the impact could be? Do we think our capabilities will address this? If not, what can we do about it? Our mitigation strategies, right? Those are our measures, actions, projects, whatever it may be called, that we can do. So that could be everything from an actionable brick and mortar, it could be actionable type of smaller type projects, and it could be things that we build a policy or another plan off of, or set up a meeting to get a better understanding of certain things. So those are the types of things that could be incremental movement towards resiliency for the district. Right, we're going to provide status updates. I mentioned that as we move through our process, we'll provide updates to the website so that you guys can keep informed and know how to kind of tie into our process, provide us feedback as we move forward. So those are the next steps. Anyway, this is the last slide. This is the email. This is again is on the district website. You guys can certainly take this down, provide us any comments you'd like back at this point, or you can do this at your leisure some other time. You can also go to the website and click on the link, which will set it up right into your email directly as well. So with that, that is the end of my presentation. I'll turn it back over to David and see if there's anything you want to add or see if you want to, scan the group
Thank
to
you,
see if there's any
Andy. Appreciate the information. That was a lot. Very detailed update on where we are. And that is, as you said, that will be posted on the website as well for folks to watch it later. I just want to pause and see if anyone has any questions at this time. If so, please either raise your hand or use the chat feature, whatever you're comfortable with. And while folks are thinking, I just want to say one thing, and folks, in other forums and spaces, folks may have heard this already, that our goal is to make this plan as actionable as possible, ready for funding, ready for implementation. And in that process, we'll be reaching out and checking with our neighboring agencies and municipalities to see find out what they're doing and look for possibilities of collaboration and partnerships with them to potentially, hopefully, increase our chance of getting funded and implementing some of these measures that we've been talking about. So that is the goal, to make this plan both um, actionable and kind of a live document that we will refer to as we progress throughout the next 5 years of our LHMP. I don't see any questions, Andy. I think that concludes our presentation. Again, appreciate your expertise in this field. We're happy that you're working with us and helping with the navigate through this process. It's truly appreciated. Thank you.